Hello, everyone, and welcome to New Consciousness Review. I'm Miriam Knight, and my guests today are Adam Bucko and Mathew Fox. Mathew is no stranger to NCR Radio. He was last here discussing his book, The Pope's War. He's an internationally acclaimed theologian working in the creation spirituality tradition of Christianity. He's also the best-selling author of 30 books, including Original Blessing, A Spirituality Named Compassion, and The Coming of the Cosmic Christ. The New York Times has praised Mathew as a Roman Catholic rebel and a celebre. Now, Adam Bucko is an activist and a co-founder of the Reciprocity Foundation, an initiative empowering homeless youth to break the cycle of poverty, and also of HAB, an interspiritual contemplative fellowship focused on training young people in radical spirituality and sacred activism. They have collaborated on a new book called Occupy Spirituality, a radical vision for a new generation, which is the debut title in a new series from North Atlantic Books called About Sacred Activism. So, Mathew and Adam, welcome. I'm so pleased to have you with me.
Thank you, Miriam. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much.
I remember years ago a bumper sticker. Actually, this was before bumper stickers, so it was one of these signs that you put on your desk that said, if you can keep your head in all this chaos, you simply do not understand the situation. And your book is almost an embodiment of that. It's a cri de coeur for people to get up off their futons, as Andrew Harvey would say, and make the world better through their own sacred activism. Now, this was supposed to have been the province of religion, but I suppose, as you point out in your book, more death and destruction have been perpetrated in the name of God than for any other reason. Where did religion go wrong?
Well, I would say one of the major detours in Christianity was the 4th century, when the religion inherited the empire, the Roman Empire, and St. Augustine came along and built a map for how to run a religion in an empire, including ideologies of original sin and dualism, matter versus spirit, and so forth. And I think that that was a real significant turning point in that. Of course, what we're trying to do now in the Christian tradition is to get back to the pre-imperial times and to find out what the historical Jesus really taught and what he really lived for and died for, and also what the early community experienced in terms of the risen Christ and the cosmic Christ. So that's one of the important turning points, I think. I think obviously you can turn to the wars, especially the Reformation wars, and of course the battle with science that really was launched in the early 17th century. So that too set religion on its heels, I think.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I was trying to get at was the distinction that you make between the God of religion and the God of life. Can you expand upon that?
Well, that's really a quote from Howard Thurman, the great African-American mystic who so influenced Dr. King that every time King went to jail, which is 39 times, he took Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited, with him. And part of Thurman's teaching is indeed that religion sometimes is more about itself than it is about life itself, and that we have to. That's how you renew religions, by continually returning to the God of life instead of the God of religion. Now, Adam may want to jump in here too, but that's in a nutshell what we're saying there.
I completely agree with Matthew's beautiful analysis, both about where religion got it wrong and also the distinction between God of religion and God of life. As someone who works with young people, especially young people who have been broken and excluded from many institutions, including religious institutions, I think that young people are no longer interested in the God of religion, simply because that God, as Mathew said, he's more preoccupied with his own survival rather than enrichment of life,
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think that was one of the primary inspirations for us to write this book, to essentially articulate what young people are interested in, what kind of spirituality they are longing for, and what kind of aspirations, spiritual aspirations they have,
Well, I think it's absolutely right that you focus on young people because they are creating the world that, the perpetuation of the world that, and the remediation of the world that we have, the mess that we have left them. But I would suggest that it's not just young people who are estranged from religion. I think more and more people in my generation, the boomer plus generation, are trying to find a spirituality that they can feel nourished from. Mathew, Adam, you have a very interesting background. Tell us how you came to do what you do. What turned you on to your path?
Well, in my case, I grew up in Poland during the communist and Soviet era, so to speak. So it was a totalitarian system that I was exposed to as a child. Very early on, I realized that I have two choices, just like most people in Poland, and one was to become an alcoholic, and the other one was to become an activist. And so deep down, I knew that I wanted to become an activist and not an alcoholic. And a lot of people around me made the choice to actually get numb with alcohol and with other things, because the pain was so great, growing up in a country that did not offer anything to its citizens, And so early on, inspired by the Solidarity movement and some of the other people who were essentially fighting for justice and fighting for a world which would offer people a chance for a better life, I decided that I wanted to become an activist, someone who wanted to stand for truth, someone who wanted to contribute to creating a world that would feel like home to people's souls. And so, because it was Poland, I was also deeply influenced by some of the activist priests from the Catholic Church, from the Solidarity movement, and through them I discovered something that Mathew Fox articulates in his creation spirituality, in his theology of creation spirituality, that any kind of authentic spirituality, the yes that we say to God has to include a no that we say to all of the things that violate God's love and justice in the world. And so early on, for me, activism was connected to spirituality, to this quest that all of us are on, And in terms of what brought me into my vocation, specifically to work with young people and homeless kids, at some point when I was 17, my family and I moved to New York City, and it was a very difficult experience for me. I didn't know any English. We were undocumented immigrants. Life wasn't that easy. And so one of the ways in which I was trying to to deal with my heartbreak of losing everything that was familiar to me and moving into a new country was essentially to go within to learn contemplative practice, and that eventually took me to a Hindu ashram, and that eventually took me to India, where I was supposed to stay at a Hindu-Christian hermitage in the tradition of Father Bede Griffiths. But on my way there, I met a homeless kid, and that really changed my life. You know, one could say it was a very typical experience that everyone in India experiences, but for me, it felt like that kid felt like a call that I needed to answer, you know, and that really located me in my truth and in my vocation that I still pursue today.
Such a beautiful story. And Mathew, you were a theologian who worked alongside the former Pope Ratzinger before he became the Pope. What moved you out of the kind of lockstep mainstream institutional Catholicism into what you have developed as the vision of the cosmic Christ?
I'm not sure I heard you correctly. Did you say I worked alongside Cardinal Ratzinger?
No, contemporaneous with.
Oh, yeah, contemporaneous. We were not on the same page at any time. Pursuing me for 12 years and giving me all kinds of trouble. So anyway, yes, I did my doctorate studies in spirituality in Paris at the Institut Catholique because Thomas Berry, the Catholic monk, advised that I go there to, that would be the best place to study spirituality. And it was there that I met my mentor, Père Chenou, a French Dominican, who named the creation spiritual tradition for me. He was also the founder, the grandfather, if you will, of liberation theology. He himself was silenced by the Pope Pius XII for 12 years, forbidden to write and publish because he worked with the worker priest movement after the war, dialoguing a lot with Marxists and the Unionists and so forth in France. But he was very much vindicated in the Second Vatican Council, where he was very significant as a theologian. And so I arrived after the council in 1967, and that council, of course, gave a whole new impetus to Catholicism to get more involved in the world, and liberation theology, especially in South America, came out of that impetus, which was a movement of preferential justice for the poor. And this antagonized, it very much antagonized the Reagan administration, who teamed up with Pope John Paul II and Ratzinger to attack theologians and base community movements all over Latin America and replace them with Opus Dei, which is an extremely right-wing movement that was countenanced by those two popes. So I ran into trouble, as I said, over 12 years because my tradition was feminist, not patriarchal, and it was earth-based and not empire-based, and they accused me of working too closely with Native Americans. I don't know what that means. That was one of their accusations. They accused me of being a feminist theologian. I did not know that was a heresy, and so they had a whole list of objections to my work. And of course, my book Original Blessing disturbed them a lot because they prefer original sin. They have an investment in it, but the truth is that no biblical scholarship recognizes original sin as being part of Jesus' consciousness, because no Jew has ever heard of original sin. And so, again, I think that's an ideology that serves empire building. So that's kind of how my journey went, and what can I say? I with the help of my Dominican order for several years, we fought Ratzinger, and then the order in America gave up on me and threw the towel in, and then I got bounced. So then I became an Episcopal priest to work with young people to reinvent forms of worship bring dance and DJing and VJing and the new art forms wrap into worship and liturgy. So I'm still doing that these days.
I thought it was interesting that you drew such a parallel between art and music and spirituality.
Oh, yeah.
You were talking about the drum beat and how rap that you use in the Cosmic Mass is can be seen as a cosmic drum beat.
Yes. I remember my very last meeting with Father Chanou. He was 90 or 91 at the time, and he said to me, never forget the greatest tragedy in theology of the last 300 years has been the divorce of the theologian from the musician, the artist, the poet, the potter, the dancer, and the filmmaker. And that always stayed with me, that art is really the link between justice and spirituality. And after all, they're both about creativity. And all the great prophets, whether you're talking Gandhi or King or whoever, or Isaiah, were involved in art, and the art of social change, and the art of awakening people to their best selves, and to, for example, nonviolence and other ways of dealing with their moral outrage. This is all a deep part of the work of justice and healing and sacred activism. So yes, I think that art is at the heart of it.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned sacred activism. How is that different from activism in general?
Well, like Adam pointed out in his own brief biography there, sacred activism looks in and does self-critique and finds a way to cease projecting onto others. And I think this is part of any meditation practice, about finding some peace within and criticizing ourselves, because otherwise activism is just changing one hat for another. Look at the French Revolution, where you went from the king killing people to the next generation guillotining everybody around. So, there's a very grave danger in activism that you feed the kind of a narcissistic, the reptilian brain, and you just exchange one form of violence for another. So I think that the sacred part is about putting things in context, realizing we're all subject to evil. We can all be participants in evil, and therefore self-criticism and calming the reptilian brain is a part of authentic or sacred activism. Now, this is an important question. Maybe Adam would like to jump in on this question as well.
Yes, so for me, sacred activism is about acting in the world, responding to crisis in the world, and living my life from the deepest sense of who I am. And so essentially activism for me is an extension of my contemplative practice, where I can sit in silence in a state of receptivity and listening, and be present to everything in the world in the state of receptivity and listening, and then sensing that rising impulse, that arising inspiration within my heart, and then saying yes to it, and hopefully living as an expression of that impulse in the world. And so to me, essentially, sacred activism is this attempt to discover what is my calling in each particular situation that I experience in my life, and so in that sense, then action becomes prayer, and prayer, or contemplative practice is not separated from being in the world. So sacred activism for me is about that kind of integrated spiritual journey where our work, where our activism, where whom we love and how we love, all of it is integrated and connected.
Mm-hmm. I was amused when you quoted Andrew Harvey as saying, talking about the bliss bunnies, the people who were happy to sit and meditate, but without that extra step into activism, into doing something positive in the world. There's a hollowness about it. I would say that possibly that's the difference between my generation and your generation. My generation is discovering this universal spirituality, and your generation is applying it in the world. Would you say that's a fair statement?
I would say yes. I mean, I think that in general, and what we say in the book and what we realize through meeting with young people and working with young people is that in the past, a lot of people who came up, in the 60s, there were two choices. One of them was to join the monastic order or to join the ashram and essentially disconnect from the world and turn their spiritual quest into a full-time enterprise away from the world. And the other one was to be in the world and do their spirituality on weekends and go on retreats and etc. But not really integrating all of life around the question of spiritual quest. And this new generation, this young generation, is not interested in that. They no longer want to lead a divided life. And so for them, a prayer that doesn't result in action just doesn't make sense. It's not complete, and it's not relevant to who they feel they are, And so in that sense, I think that it's a new development in spirituality. And of course, when we look at some of our great ancestors like Meister Eckhart, and I'm sure Mathew can talk about it beautifully, they articulated this vision many, many years ago. A vision that integrated contemplation and action, etc. But somehow our religious traditions and our spiritual traditions have never really fully embraced it, maybe with an exception of Judaism. And so I think that we're seeing something new, essentially in this new generation. People are no longer willing to lead divided lives. And that, of course, presents a problem for them because they are no longer willing to work on Wall Street and essentially screw people for a living, and then on weekends go on their contemplative retreats, so to speak. And so how are they going to figure out how to live their lives in this new and more integrated way? And I think that that's why many young people are realizing that this world simply doesn't feel like it's home for their souls. And so as a result, they're trying to create a new world. And the Occupy movement was just one example of that attempt to create a new way of relating to people, a new way of doing business, a new way of doing democracy. And that's why we see a lot of people essentially disconnecting from the mainstream society and creating their own communities and their own projects that function according to a completely different logic. Projects that allow them to have full and complete lives,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're going to need to take a brief break, and then we'll be right back with our guests. Silent, The Power of Silence by Gregory Malouf, founder of the Epsilon Healing Academy. Gregory reveals the secrets to real-life success through his engrossing stories, spiritual insights, and relevant examples from his own personal journey, as well as the experiences of those around him. It is these examples and the simple yet highly effective steps that you will easily integrate into your own life that make Silent so remarkable. Silent answers the most commonly asked questions. How can I consciously create the life I desire? How can I overcome limiting beliefs that hold me back? How can I live free from self-doubt, stress, and anxiety? How can I have more authentic, loving relationships, more wealth, and more energy for what's really important? Silent is an overwhelmingly honest account of Malouf's own struggles, from childhood abuse to outstanding success to personal crisis, and finally to complete self-fulfillment. His story is interwoven with practical advice, inspirational teachings, and motivational exercises, which instantly give you the answers you seek. Malouf has made it his mission to help others understand what is holding each of us back from living life to the fullest. Don't wait. Become aware, save what you have, value what is truly important, your innermost desires, and create the life you deserve. Go to www.gregorymalouf.com/silent offer. That's GREGORYMALOUF.com/silent offer. There you'll get more information about Greg and the book Silent, The Power of Silence.
Inspired by the #1 best-selling book, Summer's Path by Scott Bloom, founder of Daily Ohm, Walk-In is an award-winning film that boldly confronts some of life's biggest mysteries. In this emotionally gripping independent film, ailing engineer Don Newport comes face-to-face with his personal destiny when he meets an angel named Robert while on his deathbed. Robert ultimately inhabits Don's previous body while comically grappling with his newfound humanness. A surprise ending leaves viewers with a unique perspective on death and the immortality of the soul. Now available on DVD and VOD at www.walkinthemovie.com.
You were listening to New Consciousness Review. You can learn more about Miriam Knight's guests by visiting the NCR online showcase of conscious media, where you'll find thousands of spiritual and progressive titles of authors and filmmakers. And now let's get back to Miriam and her guest.
And we're back speaking with Mathew Fox and Adam Bucko about their new book, Occupy Spirituality. Tell us about the different, you talk about the difference between an elder and an old person. I thought that was very amusing. Tell us about the intergenerational dialogue that you feel is so important.
Well, one dimension to this book, Occupy Spirituality, that we did together was that we sent out surveys to many young people, young adults, and also we did filming of a number of young adult leaders around the country. And one of the questions we asked was about the role of elders in their lives. And almost to the person, they said they want elders in their life. They know they need them, but that it's very hard to find them, that the elders are often too busy on the golf course or playing the stock market or something. So I think it raises the question about the issue of being an elder and just being an older person. I think an elder is someone who has had to do some inner work and therefore has acquired some wisdom. And it's not just going along with the crowd, even if it's an elder crowd, with the illusions of what retirement means that our culture sets up there. I say that the word retirement, I think, is an obscene word, and we should replace it with the word refirement. Because there's a role for older people after they no longer have to put food on the table for the younger generation. But it's not just playing some kind of frustrating adolescent game. It's a serious matter about relating to the youngest generation, and with them leaving behind something worthwhile and noble. Now, I'd like to just say one word about the previous exchange that you and Adam had. I do want to say that I don't think that active contemplation or sacred activism just begins with this generation. I look at the people who gave their lives, literally, in South America and Central America, for example, for justice in the name of liberation theology and so forth. And I'm talking about thousands of people, some of whom I actually knew, and Archbishop Romero and all this, and they were living lives of sacred activism. So I don't think we can say that this is the generation that invented it. I mean, I think there have been periods throughout religious history where people have taken the values, and of course the civil rights movement was part of it too, where people took the values so seriously that they were willing to put their lives on the line. So I'm not quite so clear that the older generation is just treading water and the younger ones have it all together. I think that there are many examples of older people who have been living lives of sacred activism.
Absolutely.
Oh, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One can't really make across-the-board generalizations, but...
Yeah. But you're right, and for it to go more mainstream, which is really, I think, the point we're trying to make in our book, that it's not about just a small group, but Occupy Spirituality was a movement that was mainstream in the sense it was ordinary young people, and older ones too, in part joining them, who took a stand. And so I think that's really the more proper distinction, is kind of how mainstream can this get? And so it's not just a small group that stands up, but that can more and more citizens stand up, you know.
Well, now, we need to invent some different social models, because there are very few venues, actually, where elders and the younger generation come together. If you look at, say, the New Thought churches or even, weekend workshops, they tend to be very skewed and divided into, a 50, 60 plus demographic, predominantly female, or at the, positive rock concerts, it's skewed at the other end of the age spectrum. So I would think that if elders were called upon for their wisdom, they would rise to the occasion. But how do we create venues where they come together and are actually asked to contribute?
Well, I think that it's actually not that difficult to create those things, and I think that these intergenerational collaborations could essentially start as conversations. I mean, that's what Mathew and I have been doing for quite a few years, it feels. And I certainly benefited from it so much. I mean, my life has been enriched by having such an elder as Mathew in my life. And the good thing about starting these things as conversations is that we don't need a 5-year plan for that. We don't need $1 million for that. An elder could just, in a collaboration with someone younger, could just decide that once a month they will hold intergenerational conversations where they will invite both older people and younger people, and together they will explore what it means to be in a conversation, what it means to create a space of openness in which both generations could essentially share their gifts and be enriched by the gifts of the other. And so, for example, in New York City, there's One Spirit Seminary, which is the spiritual director of that seminary is Reverend Diane Bark. And one of the things that we've been exploring, I think, starting in January, we will hold intergenerational conversations once a month. We will adopt the methodology of that Parker Palmer created for conversation from his Courage for Renewal organization. And together we will explore what it means to be in communion, what can we learn from each other, and how to move forward, utilizing the wisdom that older people have and utilizing the wisdom that younger people have. Mathew often says that both groups really need each other, and so I think that it could start in a very simple way, and one of the things that we discovered, from our surveys and from talking to young people all across the country, is that young people are really longing for mentors. They're really longing for meaningful connections with the older generation. So I think the start could be very simple.
That sounds like a wonderful initiative, and I hope our listeners have taken that on board and you've planted some seeds.
Yes, and don't wait for organizations and churches to organize it. Organize it yourself. Invite 5 young people for coffee or tea to your home, and see what's on their hearts.
Wonderful. Tell us about some of the emerging movements and communities that give you a sense of hope for the future. Adam? Mathew?
Well, one of the communities that Mathew introduced me to, for example, and we talk about that community in the book, is the Canticle Farm in Oakland. Recently, we had a chance to visit that particular community, and Mathew, I think, goes there on a regular basis. And I personally was very touched by what I experienced there. It was such a beautiful community located in a very rough neighborhood in Oakland. They have an open door policy, which means that essentially anyone from the neighborhood can go into the kitchen and or the house at any time during the day or at night, make themselves a sandwich, rest, engage in conversations, and etc. They also distribute free organic food to the community. Just the energy there really touched me deeply. It feels like there's this beacon of light there that is now transforming the whole neighborhood. And traditionally, I think it was a very violent neighborhood, and now when we were there, everyone was so friendly. The response of the neighbors is just so amazing. And as Pancho Ramos, who's also celebrated in our book, said during our visit, to him, what they're doing there is Occupy 2.0. Mm-hmm. So in other words, this is like the next stage of the Occupy movement, how to gather those energies and form communities and initiatives that can start changing our neighborhoods,
Mm-hmm. What is the connection between spirituality and democracy?
Well, I think democracy, by definition, is strive to be less hierarchical and more horizontal and even circular in the sense of representative when it's doing its job correctly. And I think that spirituality, too, mysticism is really the experience of unity, deep unity of peace, of the divine, directly. And it's not vicarious, it's not handed down or meted out or rationed in a hierarchical fashion. Dorothy Sola, who was a theologian who taught at Union Theology for years, she's from Germany, she writes about that and how mysticism deconstructs hierarchy and the masculine sense of patriarchy, because it's about how everyone is loved and you cannot fall out of that love. So it's definitely a different model of being in the world, and it's a different model of being in relationship to and kinship with all of creation. It's about the web of life rather than about ladders and hierarchies.
So it's understandable that this would threaten the hierarchies of government, corporations, and so on. Do you think that it is an irresistible force whose time has come?
Well, I hope it is. again, Dorothy Stoller says that the opposite of obedience is solidarity. And so I think solidarity is a deep part of democracy, and I think it's a deep part of sacred activism. And I think that in a culture that's as privileged as ours has been, there's a tendency to ignore the power of solidarity, and which is really the raw power of democracy, because it's about, again, our horizontal connection, our being part of a common web, and with all creation and with other humans. And I think that really does deserve to catch on fire and to be in a refreshing way of viewing the world. I'm sure Adam has something to say about this question too.
Yes, I completely agree with what Mathew said, and I think for me, spirituality and democracy are very closely related. If spirituality is about discerning and discovering our gifts and developing courage to use those gifts in service of compassion and justice, then democracy for me is about gathering those gifts in such ways that all of those gifts could enrich other gifts, and so in that sense, I mean, to me, that's the meaning of democracy, whether on a personal level or on a communal level or even on a political level, where systems are essentially used to give people a chance at developing their full potential and using that potential in service of enriching the world and other people.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've said that this book is especially meaningful for people who identify as spiritual but not religious. In your surveys and conversations with young people that you have recorded in your book in different sections, do you have a sense that there is a growing group of people who are coming back to a sense of the mystical, the religious, or is it a dichotomy between, activism and spirituality?
Well, I think that many young people are interested in spirituality and view their activism as their form of spirituality. And that's why when the Occupy movement started, I think that from the very beginning, what I heard from those kids who were occupying Wall Street was that they were refusing to see that as just a political initiative. For them, it was a spiritual initiative simply because it included all areas of life, including spirit. And so, in terms of the spiritual but not religious, I mean, it's a word that I think, sociologists of religion and journalists like to kind of throw around. And even on Huffington Post Religion last year, it was one of the biggest stories in the religious world. They said the arrival of the knowns, the non-affiliated. Mm-hmm. But it means many different things for many different people. In general, for young people, I feel like, they're tired of oppressive systems, of systems that no longer serve, able to meet their longings, and so they're throwing all of that stuff out the window, and instead they want to find tools and practices and wisdom that can help them, that can empower them, that can transform them, And so in that sense, they are very much interested in the mystical, and they are very much interested in the contemplative. And again, for them, they don't make a distinction between that and being active in the world. In terms of our book, speaking specifically to that particular group, I think that when we were writing the book, I think that we kind of aimed to speak to that group. But one of the things that I've discovered recently is that, the reviews that came out about our book, surprisingly, quite a few of them are actually written by ministers. There's even one review written by a Mormon thinker who said that this book is helping him to become a more socially justice-oriented Mormon. Now, that was a surprise to me, but I'm happy that this book is speaking to so many different groups of people, both within our churches, within our temples and mosques, as well as those who are no longer interested in those religious systems, but who want to claim their spiritual gifts.
I find that some people have their feet out, sometimes others their feet in, and some people have 1 foot in and 1 foot out of organized religion. So I think in a way we're trying to meet all those, because we're in this transition time for all the good reasons that this conversation has raised, and that Adam just articulated.
There was one really interesting point that I wanted to close on, and that was your discussion of community. I mean, in a sense, religious groups are a community identification, and they all have their rituals. So you talked about a ritual creating community. What would you say would be the way to create new communities? Is there a role for ritual? And I'm thinking specifically, Mathew, about your cosmic mass.
Well, Mathew Musome is an African spiritual teacher now living in California, who makes a point based on his indigenous tribal experience that there is no community, he says, without ritual. That ritual is a way in which you gather community and get the deepest gifts exposed and shared, and also the deepest grief. So it's a place for sharing joy and grief, for sharing creativity, and for developing the spiritual warriorhood that is really necessary. So we have been trying to create alternative rituals using the language of young people now for over 15 years. We call it the Cosmic Mass, but using the language of rave, dance, VJ, DJ, and rap to go into a trance. And we've had some amazing experiences with this, and one experience is part of this intergenerational communion that can happen, because I find that older people are just as bored with church as younger people, and they take as much delight out of being able to dance their prayers rather than just read them from a book as do young people. Just a couple of months ago, we did a Cosmic Mass for about 1,000 people in the mountains of Colorado at a Sounds True conference. And it was very ecumenical. There were Sufis and Buddhists and pagans and goddess worshippers and Christians and so forth, and even some atheists. And we all derived a lot of benefit from that, judging from the very strong feedback we got. So, yes, ritual is not just the result of community, it's also a way to build community. Mm-hmm. And I think we've missed out on this. Again, indigenous people have known this for 100,000 years. It's their basic form of education, in fact, and passing values on to the younger generation, not by putting them in desks and telling them to be quiet for 7 hours, or they have a disease and they have to have drugs, but through ceremony. And ceremony involves the whole body, it involves the chakras, it involves imagination, it involves multi-generation. And multicultural. You talk a lot about interspirituality and this deep ecumenism. If you're right, if your vessel for worship is well thought out, people from many traditions and cultures can be at home there, and this provides the diversity and the imagination and the depth that we're all longing for, as Adam said.
Well, I'd like a final word from Adam because we're just about out of time. What would be your message to particularly the younger generation, Adam?
Well, I think my message would be both to the younger generation and to the older generation. I certainly hope that they would read our book, but not so much, read our book to embrace our views, but rather just to experience an intergenerational dialogue and then start creating those dialogues in their own communities. Commit to those dialogues, figure out ways in which both generations can begin to share their gifts, and then see what can emerge out of that. I think that in terms of building democracy, in terms of building a new spiritual culture, that's the way to go, is to bring those two generations together and to allow their gifts to enrich each other.
Beautifully said. We've been speaking with Adam Bucko and Mathew Fox about their book, Occupy Spirituality. Is there a website that they can go to?
Well, they can certainly go to my website, MathewFox.org, and pick up some links there, including, of course, the link with Adam's website, the Reciprocity Foundation.org. So both of those websites contain the work we're involved in and, follow up to this kind of discussion.
Super. Mathew and Adams, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you. Thank you.